talk about what I think is a very, very important phenomenon. And some of the things I'm going to say are based in fact. A lot of things I may say will be controversial. The things that are controversial that I say, we can attribute that to somebody else if you're taking notes. But what I want to do is really challenge the way we're thinking about our combat veterans. And I first began by talking about what is combat. Combat involves killing another human being. And in the process, avoid being killed. Now think about that. Everything that we do in the military, everything our soldiers, Marines, airmen, and sailors do is about killing another human being and in the process, avoid being killed. And anyone who engages in either of these actions is changed. Anyone who engages in these actions requires tremendous psychological and physical demands. So, what about these changes that happen? Many of the changes that you see in combat veterans often express themselves in a paradox, or paradoxes, said correctly. Literally dozens and dozens of paradoxes emerge in their thoughts, in their emotions, and in their behaviors. Now, what is a paradox? Well, a paradox is a statement that seems to contradict itself. And the best example I can think of outside of the combat veteran paradox is something my wife says to me all the time that I find paradoxical, in which she says, "I saved you money by buying this on sale." So how is that possible that my wife is saving me money by spending my money, right? Well, if she's buying something that we needed anyway, and she gets it on sale, she has saved me money, right? Now, if she buys something that I don't think we needed, then I think she's wasted my money or didn't save it, okay? So you can see there's a hidden truth to paradoxes. Now, what are some of these paradoxes regarding combat veterans that I want to share with you? Well, first, the paradox I want to mention is the courage paradox. Any service member who's been to combat and comes home has, by their very nature, demonstrated strength and courage. Yet at the same time, these very same individuals are afraid to admit they might have a mental health problem. They're afraid to ask for help. They're afraid to say they're sorry because that's a sign of weakness. So how can you be strong on one hand and display weakness on another? Another example is the Morpheus paradox, the god of sleep. Combat veterans will tell you, "I'm exhausted physically, mentally," yet they can't sleep. Well, if you're tired, how come you can't sleep? Well, could be because they're afraid of the nightmares they might have. It could be because they're keyed up still from their deployment. And a lot of folks think, "Oh, well, you're home now, you should stop being keyed up." But oftentimes it takes years for combat veterans to calm down and learn to relax following a deployment. Again, another paradox. The mixed emotion paradox. Many combat veterans come home, happy to be home, happy to be alive, happy many of their unit members made it back alive, but at the same time they're very angry. Well, how can you be angry and happy at the same time? Oftentimes, combat veterans are angry about how they were treated while they were deployed. Oftentimes, they express anger towards their leadership. And these aren't pleasant things to address and to acknowledge. Veterans come home or often have hair-triggered tempers. One minute they're fine, the next minute they're in a rage, throwing things, kicking things. Veterans will also come back and tell you they've learned to appreciate the important things in life, the life-meeting paradox. Yet at the same time, they can't let go of the little things. When I retired, people say, well, you military folks are all the same. You get mad when people show up late for meetings. And I say, we're not upset that you're late for the meeting. We're upset that you didn't have any more respect for my time, that you didn't show up on time. And then if you don't respect my time, that means you don't respect me. You see how the veteran thinking escalates. Somebody's 10 minutes late to a meeting, goes into, you're disrespecting me. They're angry. So how can you appreciate these important things in life that veterans tell us about? My family, my religion, my children, my buddies. But at the same time, you can't let go of the little things. See, this is a paradox. And there are lots of these paradoxes. But if you think about it from the standpoint of a family member, someone who's angry, withdrawn, won't share their experiences, easily angered, won't tell you what's going on, are they fun people to be around? Now, I've been accused of not being a fun person to be around. Okay? But one of the things that's really important is that we reach out to veterans and we help them understand what's happening to them. Now, I want to say something, I want to make this very clear. Just because someone has changed because of their combat experience, that doesn't mean they have a mental health disorder. It doesn't mean they have post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, in the latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Illnesses, the words military and combat do not even appear in the diagnosis for post-traumatic stress disorder. The military is not even identified as an at-risk population of all the occupations that are mentioned. How many knew that? Does that make any sense? That's for another talk. My point is, it doesn't mean you have post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't mean you're going to be homicidal and suicidal. Okay? And it most certainly doesn't mean that we need to give you a mental health diagnosis. But if you took this veteran and you only looked at one half of those paradoxes, and you sent that veteran to a mental health care provider, odds are this combat veteran would get a mental health diagnosis, right? But oftentimes, all they really need is counseling to help them understand how combat can change someone. Now, is that psychiatric treatment? The definition of psychiatric treatment requires you have a diagnosis. So what do you call it when I'm just helping you navigate the experiences that you've just had, to try to understand your experiences, to try to understand how those changes in you can influence and affect your relationships with other people? Is that therapy? Is that counseling? Is that mentoring? Can family members do this? Can community members do this? I would argue absolutely they can do this. Oftentimes, all our combat veterans need is a framework for understanding what they've experienced and how those experiences can change their thoughts, their emotions, and their behaviors. Another important thing for combat veterans is for us to get them to share some of their experiences. Oftentimes, our veterans will tell us, civilians don't understand me because they haven't served in the military. If you haven't deployed to combat, you can't possibly understand what I've been through. Okay, fair enough. Tell me what you've been through. No, I don't want to talk about it. So, another paradox. Our veterans are angry and upset that folks don't understand them, but on the other hand, they won't tell us what they've experienced to help us understand them. So it's important that we encourage combat veterans to share their story. Not all of their story, but a part of the story they feel comfortable with. And many of our veterans are doing this, not through counseling, but through song and art and poetry and diaries. It's a form of showing their expressions. Many times, children, family members will come up to me and say, wow, after hearing about this, I now understand my dad, who died 2 years ago. He was a Korean War veteran. But we don't need to wait until our combat veterans die to understand them. Finally, what we need to do is work to make sure combat veterans stay connected. Here, I believe the fundamental building block are relationships. And I don't mean a relationship with a spouse or a partner. I mean relationships broadly. And relationships first began with combat veterans having a great relationship with themselves. Because I believe that if an individual has a great relationship with themselves, they're less likely to engage in risk-taking behaviors like suicide, like drug use, like alcohol use. But also the relationship with their family members, their colleagues at work, their supervisors at work. Oftentimes we hear about veterans who can't get along with peers at work or their supervisor. They don't understand me. They've never served. But these relationships are very important if they're going to have a successful transition from military service back to civilian life. And you also want them to have great relationships in their community. You want them to feel connected to their community, be part of their community. You want them to have a sense of purpose in how they're contributing to their community. Because our veterans have lots of strengths. This is the paradox. They've changed for both the better, and in some cases, if they're not adapting, it could be for the worse. And what we have to do is leverage those strengths that all of our veterans have to offset any shortcomings that the negative impact of being in combat can have. Because oftentimes it does take years to overcome some of these negative experiences that our veterans have. There's only one thing that I think our veterans are entitled to, and that's the right to enjoy life. And I tell veterans, if you're happy getting a divorce, I'm happy for you. If you're happy not having a job, fine. If you're happy not liking your boss, okay. As long as you can tell me you're enjoying life. And I think by all of us working together to try to understand these paradoxes that our combat veterans experience will make us all stronger. There's nothing new in these combat veteran paradoxes that I'm talking about. They've been described for thousands of years. What is new is we are just beginning to understand how these combat veteran paradoxes can impede our veterans' ability to enjoy life. So I hope we can all work together to fully explore the impact of these paradoxes so our veterans can enjoy life. Thank you.